Welcome to the Leadmore podcast. I'm your host, John T. Meyer. The Leadmore podcast is the show where we sit down with leaders of today to help inspire and create more leaders for tomorrow. And in this episode, we have a clearly defined leader, Senator John Thune. John Thune has been out in D.C. both as a representative and a senator for 25 years. We talked about what does it mean to lead in Congress in today's era. How have things changed over those 25 years? But we also rewound the clock and looked at, did you think you would be in politics? And what are the traits and characteristics that you innately have by growing up and being raised in South Dakota that can help you in your political career? So, great conversation. I was thankful for the senator to take some time to stop by the office here at Lemonly and talk about leadership. So, without further ado, Senator John Thune. All right, welcome to another episode of the Leadmore podcast. I'm here with Senator John Thune. Thanks for coming today.
Great to be with you. Thanks, John.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. So I'm going to dive right in.
Yeah.
One of the themes of the show in leadership is that often leaders maybe don't seek the role; they get nudged or pushed to step up to lead. And so I want to dive right in. You grew up in Murdo, South Dakota. When did you think you would be? Did you have aspirations to be a leader, or did you have someone who nudged you?
I didn't have aspirations of my own, and I didn't grow up around in a political family. But I had a chance encounter that we had chatted about earlier with an elected official when I was a freshman in high school. He was kind of a sports fan, and he came to a basketball game. I was a freshman. I was playing some varsity ball. It was a Friday night game. I got into the game. I had 6 attempts at the free throw line. I made 5 of them.
Okay.
We had to play the next night. It was a tournament, so we'd play Saturday night. He came over for the Saturday night games, and I was at we used to have a department store on Main Street in Murdo, and I was at the checkout counter buying something, and this guy in the line behind me taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and he goes, "I noticed you missed one last night." And I'm like, "Who's this smart aleck? I'm a freshman. I made 5 out of 6. Give me a break." And he introduced himself as Congressman Jim Abner, and he took an interest in my sports career. I kind of started following his political career, and later on, he offered me a job, and that's kind of where I really got plugged in and interested. And had it not been for his interest in me, I'm quite certain I wouldn't have ended up doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, and that seems to be the theme of the show, are these little moments that can change the trajectory of one's career or path.
Well, I always tell people, young people, high school and college age, that you might be thinking about a particularly career path, or you might be going to study something in college. If a door opens, don't be afraid to push it open and see what's on the other side.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we have God has a way of opening doors for us too at times, and sometimes just it might be something kind of off of your beaten path, but it might be an opportunity that could pay big dividends for you.
So I think it's fair to say you maybe didn't choose politics, it maybe chose you.
Yeah, I didn't grow up around it at all. In fact, when you talk about leadership early on, about the closest thing I had to leadership, I obviously in school and class president, things like that, but was just in sports and kind of team sports and trying to be, I played quarterback on the football team, and so you have some opportunities like that and think that maybe you've got some sort of skill for pulling people together, but how that translated into politics certainly would never have happened had it not been for that chance encounter back in January of 1976. So
you talk about those skills, some of the traits I think of in a politician you are quite adept at, whether it be remembering names. I know you've been known for being good at reaching consensus. Are those things that you think you had, or did you have to develop those over time?
I think that part of it, I think a little bit of that is in our gene pool out here in South Dakota.
Sure.
We've talked about some of our past leaders, and I think that we have instinctively, I believe, and maybe it just comes from living out here on the prairie and being Scandinavian. I always tell people that when you're Scandinavian, you believe life is supposed to be hard, and you have to try and figure out ways to solve things. And I think we're solution oriented out here on the prairie. I think we have probably proportionately a lot more just good old fashioned common sense. My dad used to call it good old plain horse sense. And that means you've got to be able to figure out how to resolve conflict and disputes and bring people together if you're going to solve problems. So I think it's maybe a little bit genetic out here.
Sure.
And I'm certainly not the only person. There's a lot of folks here in leadership positions in South Dakota who I think possess a skill set that enables them to find consensus.
Yeah, we'll bookmark that conflict part and come back to that. But
Yeah.
we were talking before we hit record about South Dakota has a nice track record of folks who have gone out to DC and taken on leadership roles. Yourself, Daschle, McGovern. Is there when you're in the arena, is there something that attracts, because you were voted on by your peers often for those type of positions? Why do we have such a track record there?
I think a lot of it has to do with it's very relationship based. When you're particularly in a collegial body like Congress, House, Senate, any place like that, you have to be good at reaching out and building relationships, and part of that's being a good listener. I mean, you want to find out about what makes them tick, and I think that's something again that maybe it's in our DNA or something out here.
Yeah.
But at least in my experience, I only speak for myself. A lot of it has to do with just building trust and developing relationships where people know that they can trust you, become comfortable around you, know that you're a good listener, and know that they're being heard.
Yeah.
And those are qualities, at least, that I found very helpful in moving into leadership positions in a place where you've got what they always say is 100 class presidents. United States Senate, which is a lot of very driven type A type people, trying to figure out how to maneuver and in a way that enables you to have some input into what happens in the place really revolves around relationships.
Yeah, and that was going to be one of my questions that we'll go to now. Is you've been out there long enough to see several classes of senators and representatives come through. What do you think motivates those people to lead? Because they are probably historically were leaders, maybe growing up.
Right.
Do you think everyone's out there for the same reason, or does everyone have their own initiative?
I try and ascribe good motives to people in any sphere or field. But in politics, I do believe that people, in most cases, genuinely have an aspiration to do good, to make a difference. Yep. And how they achieve that gets translated in a lot of different ways. There are very different paths, and I think that how people get to where they're going sometimes really varies based upon circumstances, their own God-given abilities and background and experience and all that. But I do think that people come there because they want to do good things. And obviously, there is a huge difference of opinion about what that is. Everybody has a different idea, and that's why we have so many, particularly now, very spirited political debates. But I think most of them, and there's a lot of really smart people in the Senate, a lot of Ivy League lawyers, some with military backgrounds, people who were achievers before they got there, and you respect those accomplishments and appreciate the fact that they're willing to involve themselves in public service. But you just hope that in the end you can figure out how to get at least a majority, or in some cases a supermajority of those people to work together to get things done.
Yeah, which seems increasingly difficult. But that was the question I wanted to ask you is, I know that we see such a different side of it from the media. Is it as divisive now, or is it more divisive than it was when you first started, or was it always that way and we just hear about it differently? Or
I think there are a couple things that have changed in my time in office that have really made it more divisive, and part of it has to do with the way people get information.
Yep.
And that starts with 24/7 cable news coverage,
Yep.
which the advent of that was really kind of mid-90s. That's right when I was coming into public life. And then, of course, social media has just really exacerbated it, and people get into these bubbles of information and aren't willing to hear what the other side has to say or accept any new information, and it pushes people more to the fringes. And then you add on top of that the way campaigns are run today, with all the outside money and super PACs, unlimited amounts, millions and millions of dollars put into campaigns, in many cases to challenge people either on the left or the right.
Yeah.
And so people start looking over their shoulders and worry more about primary elections than about kind of the center. And I always tell people that in the Senate, historically, solutions are found in the center. You gotta be able at some point to come there. It's harder to do that when you've got that many things pulling you in different directions. So it's a challenge. on a good day to get anything done, and we don't have a lot of good days these days. So,
Yeah. Is being a senator fun?
you know, it's like any job. I tell people there are good days and bad days.
Sure.
Some days are more fun than others. But to me, it's if it's about making a difference and helping people solve problems, and you get a chance to do that. And people always ask me what's the most rewarding part of your
Yeah.
job, and I typically tell them that I enjoy the policy work and all the things that we do legislatively. But in the end, it's really about the problems we help solve for people here. And we have an office in Sioux Falls and one in Rapid and one in Aberdeen. And any given day, people are coming in with an issue with the VA or with Social Security or an immigration issue, and our offices are very engaged in trying to help them out. And some of the most rewarding things that we've done have really been what I would call casework. That's dealing with cases and people that have issues with the federal government. So. But it can be frustrating because, for the reasons we talked about, and that is it's sometimes hard to get things done these days.
Yeah.
And you can be there a long time, and in the Senate especially, which was designed, to be the world's greatest deliberative body and to slow things down. But sometimes that can get taken to an extreme.
Sure.
But if you like to get things done, it's a place where I think you can make a difference, and that's why I do it, and I think that's why most people do it.
Yeah, and I think that part about on the local level, if we, part of the thesis of this show is that we need more leaders. And so if I, as a citizen, want to try to make a difference, obviously I can vote. That's the number one. But they also always say, call your senator, call your representative. So let's say I call your office in Sioux Falls.
Right.
What happens then? I mean, I know you're probably not listening to all those messages, or how do they filter? Are we keeping tally of how many people feel about one issue?
Yeah, we are. I mean, we log every call, every email, and try to respond to all of them.
Yep.
And I talk regularly with our front office people. Just what are the phones? What are people calling about today? Well, I got 15 calls on this, 20 on this, and which side of this issue are they on? And are these South Dakota calls? Are they manufactured? Are they real? Is it real people? Or is it one of these campaigns where there's a lot of that these days too? But yeah, you do track it. I think the advantage that people who are involved in local government or state government have is they are closer to the people. There's an accountability there that I think people value, and the issues are generally personal. And I tell the mayor of Sioux Falls when I see him that his job, my job is child's play next to his, because every issue is personal, and they know where he lives, and they know how to get a hold of him.
Yep.
But I think that's one of the challenges we face today in government is the disenfranchisement that people have is largely with Washington, because they view it as so far away and so distant from their problems, and such a big bureaucracy that isn't listening. And much of this swirl that we've had, this tumult that we've had the last few years, I think is largely a result of people's just mistrust of institutions. And I think part of that is because there's a sense that they're not accountable to us. They aren't listening to us. They aren't responding to us. They're not hearing our voice.
Yeah. I think a huge part of leadership is certainly modeling the behavior that you want your team or constituents or players, if you're a coach, to model and follow, right? It did feel like maybe in the last 4 years we probably had a leader that wasn't always modeling the behavior we looked for. It was on your side, your team, I guess we say. How do you deal with that as a leader, kind of who also reports to a leader?
Yeah, it's always challenging in my job, and it's especially challenging when you're in a leadership position in your party, because then you're always wanting to help your team succeed. But there are times when members of your team need to be called out.
Yeah.
And I think you have to do that. I think we have to be honest, and I think people appreciate it, that you're willing to challenge, if necessary, people even on your side of the aisle. And I do think that you want to have people, and so you try and model that behavior. There was an old saying that it doesn't cost you anything to be nice. I think you can be nice to people, you can be civil to people, but you also have to speak the truth. And at some point, you've got to level with people, and even if it's not what they want to hear.
Hmm.
And I think that leaders have responsibility. There's a leadership writer that used to say that the first job of leadership is to define reality.
Yeah.
And people have to know what's realistic. You want to have realistic expectations about what's achievable and give them achievable goals. And I think that anytime you're in a leadership position, you try and model the behavior that you think is going to be most conducive to achieving those goals and accomplishing that objective. And I think that for me, it's always been about speaking the truth, but doing it in a spirit of kindness. I don't think you have to be at war all the time. There's
Combative,
a lot
yeah.
more of that
Yeah.
nowadays. And sometimes you do have to dig in and fight. And I let, when necessary, I'll do that. But I always try and approach people who disagree with me, and there are a lot of them these days, with just trying to understand where they're coming from,
Yeah.
and hearing them and trying to relate to where they are, and then speaking the truth to them, but doing it in a spirit of kindness.
So when I hear you talk about your time out in DC, sometimes it feels maybe a little nostalgic or thinking back to the way things used to be.
Yeah.
So is the genie out of the bottle on all of this? If you had even more power than you have, like magical powers,
Yeah.
can you wave your wand and how do we fix some of this divisiveness?
Well, I always think all these things take is behavioral change. I mean, we can fix these things by changing our behavior. Everybody wants to change the system, and you got to get rid of the filibuster or this or that. And some of those, some of those protections were built into our democracy so that the minority in the country has a voice.
Yep.
And the supermajority protections in the Senate are there because that what the founders intended for the Senate was to be a place where you didn't do everything by simple majority rule, where
Yeah.
you had to hear the voices of the minority, and you had to find compromise. So to your question about whether the genie's out of the bottle, I think it's a long ways out. I don't know if it can be put back in. When I first got into politics as a staffer back in the 1980s, of course, it was in my view, I was the golden era. I was one of the reasons I got interested, in addition to Jim Abner, who I worked for, was Ronald Reagan, because I liked his hopeful approach to things. He had strong convictions. He was a person who really believed he was a right of center conservative, but he was also somebody who had an eye toward finding solutions to get things done. And he had a hopefulness about him. And I think politics, to me, ought to be about appealing to people's hopes, not preying on their fears.
Yeah,
and I think
agree with that.
these days it's too much about preying on people's fears and getting them all spun up and angry and hostile, and so I'm not sure it can be put back to the way it was, because I just think the world's changed a lot and technology's been part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not going anywhere, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good point. Do you think you could lead in a different context if you wanted to make a career change? I'm making a career change.
Right.
You maybe would say you're toward the end, but would you want to be a leader in a private sector or in, I guess what this question is, are you
Yeah,
gonna
I mean,
run
I
again?
think to me that the key to leadership is the people you put around you, and you know that.
Yep.
Your success here in your business is largely a function of just surrounding yourself with really
100%,
quality
yeah.
people. And so, what a leader does is try to create a culture. And so if I were to go somewhere else in another sphere, be it business or education or anything like that, I would really focus on bringing the right team aboard, because that's ultimately how you're going to succeed. And I think any leader who doesn't understand that and isn't willing to share the credit with the team is really missing the boat. So could I? Maybe. Would I? I don't know. I mean, you're right. I'm getting at the end. I'm an old guy now. But we'll see. Right now, obviously, I've got a job to do, and we got a lot of stuff this fall to try and get through. That's going to be really thorny.
Yeah. You said it's going to be a busy,
Gonna
tough
be,
one.
It's going to be a tough one. Yeah.
I want to know from some of the conversations, the meetings, the events that you've been in, what are some lessons or tactics you've learned from other great leaders that you maybe tried to apply, kind of imprint on yourself? One thing we've learned in the show is a lot of people, they copy paste or they copy edit paste.
Yeah.
Is there a story or a conversation?
Well,
or lesson
I
learned?
mean, I think you always model your leadership style kind of based on, it's little bits and pieces of places you've been, leaders you've seen, things you've observed, and hopefully lessons that you've applied. And I think the whole model of listen, learn, lead is really a valid one. So part of it for me, instead of coming into a meeting and being the first person to speak, because what I've got to say is so important, is to hear everybody else out, and then you can kind of distill what what everybody's feelings are, how visceral they are, and what it's going to take to get to a solution. So I think being patient is something that I've learned, rather than being quick to speak, being slow to speak, and quick to listen. And I think that too, is just understanding that somebody once said that people are not drawn to you by what they see in you, but by what you see in them. And I think it's helping people understand how important their voice is and the role they play in your success. So those are, I've sat under lots of different leaders through the years in the House and the Senate, and political leaders, and I've been with a lot of business and Fortune 500 type guys, and different styles. And you try and kind of synthesize and take little bits and pieces. And there's some bad stuff too, I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah.
But you try and take the good and figure out how to sort of add it to the composite of what you're trying to become as a leader, and make you better at what you do.
I think the study of leadership, or the art of leadership, that's so fascinating, is there's several ways to do it, right? There's more than one way to lead. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of different styles that have had success and failure. One that I always think is great, they say, the most beautiful sound is the sound of your name.
Yeah.
And you have an incredible memory bank. And I've always wanted to ask, like, a senator, how much of that is like the people over here off camera, and how much of it is, do you have like a tactic? Do you have a system? Because I know, like, I notice you always ask, like, where people are from, right? Are you making like mental connections?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, and I'm not very good at it, but the guy I worked for was, and so I learned some things from him. But I am genuinely interested. I like people's stories. I'm really interested in where people are from and how they got where they are. And in many cases, this state is small enough that you can kind of make a connection with somebody in a community. And sometimes when I'll see somebody, I can't, I'm trying to put the name with the face. I'll recognize the face, and I may not remember the name, but I remember something about them because of a question I asked about a kid that was involved in sports, or a debate, or that came to Washington with a school group or something like that. And people appreciate that. And I think it's a very useful skill in politics. Like I said, I'm not particularly good at it, and I'm getting worse as I get older. But I'm surrounded with good staff too, and sometimes somebody will whisper something in your ear at just the right time, and that's especially helpful.
Yeah, I think we all could use one of those people, right?
Like, I'm waiting for you guys, and maybe this is something you guys can come up with, is figure out a way to get so when you see somebody coming, you can kind of take a mental shot.
That'll be the better version of Google Glass or whatever it was.
Exactly.
That didn't really turn out. But okay, let's do a little bit. We'll dig into a little bit about you as a person. I don't know if you're a big reader, but what's a book that you would recommend to folks most often?
Well, I love certain writers, and David McCullough has written a lot of great works, and he wrote John Adams, which is a wonderful book, 1776, a lot of historical stuff. I like that period type stuff. Some of the stuff on Churchill, I've read a good amount of. Jeff Shera, who is he's a fictional, but it's a lot of World War I, World War II. I'm fascinated by how some of these conflicts started. I've always wondered, how the heck, when Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, that this conflagration that got underway, and all of it was because nobody would back down. The different sides started taking shape, and then 50 million dead people later, we're World War I, and then that leads us into World War II. And so I'm interested in those types of stories, because I think if you're going to be, chart a better future for humanity, you got to understand its past.
Yep.
I just read a book my daughter gave me called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by a guy named John Mark Comer. And really interesting book, but it talks about the importance of silence and solitude, slowing down. And And then I'm just reading right now one called Necessary Endings, which was by a guy named, he's a leadership, mostly works with corporate types, named Dr. Henry Cloud.
Okay.
And so that's what I've been most recently, I guess, have been into.
And I suppose when do you even get that time? Is it on the plane, or are you an audiobook guy when you run?
Yeah, I not as much. I probably should do more of that. But when I'm listening to audio, it kind of goes in and out sometimes because I've got my mind's going, and you need to slow down and focus if you're going to do it audio. So yeah, because I like to make notes.
Okay.
And I guess you can do that if you know how to do it with technology. But
Sure.
I'm still kind of old-fashioned that way. When I read, I really do like to make notes. Like I said, there's some books I just kind of mark up and I kind of go back to them. I read a book a while back by Tim Keller called Counterfeit Gods, which was really good. And I've made a lot of notations in there because there's a lot of stuff that hit home, and I'll sometimes go back to them. But yeah, I mean, self-help stuff.
I imagine you can agree or disagree with this statement. I think a big part of being a senator is synthesis, right? Like a lot of information's coming inward.
Yeah.
You need to digest it as fast as possible, simplify, and then be able to go speak about it.
Right. Yeah, it is, and that's a challenge. And you have a lot of stuff, and having good staff is important because they can help you sift through what you need to see and some of the stuff you don't. But then you've got to be able to to distill what's important. I've been fortunately just blessed with I have a really good memory for numbers. Most stuff it's trivia that nobody batting averages and that kind of stuff, which is like what's the value there. But so and that's why, like, for example, I really liked history in high school and college because there's a lot of dates.
Yeah.
And I had this great memory for numbers. I could see a number and I just see it, or a phone number, and see it and remember it. And that's been really helpful too on just when it comes to economic data, tax policy, being able to ferret stuff out that's important, and then being able to explain it. But you're right. I mean, it's an acquired skill. I think most people, if they work at it,
it's like a
can
muscle,
do it.
right?
It is. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I don't have anything that anybody else doesn't have, but I've had to, for various in various circumstances, apply that more, and so that muscle it's working more, I guess, some of the time.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is a feeling I think all people have, but maybe more in South Dakota, is once you've been around, and you've been in way more rooms than I have, but successful CEOs or other politicians or leaders, I think one of the quickest lessons is you learn that they're just other regular people. Yeah. They're just like us.
Yep.
And so I think I appreciate that you said, I don't have a superpower on that. I just work on it and try to get better. And
yeah,
I think when we recognize that, we start to not only build more empathy that these people are just like our neighbors and our friends, but also just understand that, like, you could be that person too, right? Yeah. Like, I think part of the show is to encourage other people to step up and lead.
Yeah, I think that's right. And everybody has is gifted differently, and has strengths and weaknesses. And you what you do in life is try and shore up your weaknesses, accentuate your strengths, and use them to their highest and best use. But yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of CEOs of the companies that we all hear and read about all the time, have been in my office at various times. And you're right, they're all, in most cases, pretty down to earth people, pretty much like you and me, just worth a few $1 billion more. But they've done well, and partly because they took advantage of opportunities that they were presented with. And I don't think in some cases there are some really extraordinarily bright people, but there are also just a lot of pretty regular people like the rest of us who got an opportunity, and the timing was right, and were courageous enough to move forward, and now have accomplished some pretty remarkable ththings.
Yeah, that's great. And I just hope that message resonates. You didn't think you'd be a senator.
Yeah.
You have, I mean, I don't want to downplay it, but you're from Murdo, South Dakota, right? And you can make it happen.
Ordinary, average kid from Murdo. That's right.
A question I like to ask leaders, because I think it's important, is how do you unplug? What do you like to do to de-stress? I've seen the Instagrams. I know you like to rock that tank top.
Yeah. And I guess at my age, I probably ought to start covering up more. But I do like things where, because one of the things, at least for me, is stress, the buildup, and that you need the outlet, and so
Hmm.
physical exercise is a great outlet for me. Um, and I think too, doing family and being outdoors, there's something about outdoors is very therapeutic, and so that's why, even when I run, I hate a treadmill.
Sure.
I just want to be. I want to see the scenery, the change of scenery. If it's a neighborhood or it's the trail, or on a bike or out, fishing or hunting or somewhere. But the outdoors, I think, is there's a real peacefulness and serenity that comes with getting out there. So I'm an outdoorsy person. That's kind of how I unwind, and like to do family stuff. And as you've seen, hang with the kids and the
Yeah.
grandkids. And so faith's an important part of my life, and so weekends, getting to church and doing that with family is also really important.
So this is a question we ask when we interview at Lemonly, but what's your superpower? It forces us, Midwesterners, to brag about ourselves, which
Yeah.
we're not usually very good at.
Well, like I said, I never thought of myself as having anything that's very extraordinary. I suppose if it was anything, we talked about a little bit earlier, it's just a focus on details and little stuff, and a memory.
Hmm.
And again, I'm not particularly good at it. You're overstating that, but there is such great value in my world, in being able to remember people's names or something about them. Um, and like I said, it comes into play when you have to remember pieces of information or articulate it in a some sort of a media interview. So it's not believe me, it isn't a superpower, but it's at least something that has served me well in this life.
Because it makes me think in your role where you're always meeting people, some new, many of them old, in terms of you've met them before. If we were to think of a percentage of how much of it is a personal connection and how much of it is an issue
Mhm.
or a topic, my guess is it's probably like 80-20.
Yeah,
People
for
aren't
sure.
coming up to you saying, we're going to talk about, agricultural politics for the next 5 minutes,
Yeah.
right?
Right. I mean, there are people who do that, but no. In most cases, my connection with people is going to be on something that's very personal, and because we're very personal beings, and politics is a very personal business. And so if you know something about their family, or something about maybe where they went to school, or any piece of information that forms that connection, I think it's important. And it's important for people too, especially having gone through this pandemic. There's so much. There's been a real physical toll, real emotional toll, real
Yeah.
mental toll, and I think people are really longing for connection. And sometimes they go and get that connectivity on the internet in places they probably shouldn't, or that aren't in a way that's not constructive or wholesome to them. But I think that we all need that, and I think the more we focus on that, in this book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry,
Yeah,
is a
I'm intrigued. Yeah.
good example of that too, just to kind of slow down, and not we're always going so fast and thinking about where we need to be next and what we're going to do, and just kind of live in the moment, in the present, and try and connect with the people around you.
That's good. Got two left for you.
Yeah.
The leaders who have inspired you, whether you've read about them or them, mentors, other
Mhm.
folks.
Well, I mentioned, Ronald Reagan was kind of the president that I grew up with, because I was graduating high school. The first election I voted in was in 1980. Jim Abner, of course, who was my mentor, and the guy that, if it hadn't been for him, like I said, in January of 1976, I'm quite certain I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And he was an example of, in fact, when I first went to work, from my first day on the job, I ran into somebody in the Capitol in Washington who was a staffer of a fellow senator on the Senate Appropriations Committee. And he said to me, "Your boss has got to be the nicest man on Capitol Hill." And that was kind of the reputation he had. He was just a genuinely, sincerely nice guy. And, I learned a lot about how to, everything I tell people, everything I learned that's good about politics, I learned from him. There's a lot of stuff that's not so good about politics. But anyway, those are a couple people. There's a guy that I really admired, And he was a person who on a faith level has really kind of been an inspiration to me, and he passed away a few years ago. A guy named Chuck Colson, who had written a lot of books. He was the heavy in the Nixon administration. He was a Marine, Harvard lawyer, tough guy, and ended up going to jail, and he wrote a ton of books. And he's always been a kind of a great inspiration for me, just in terms of how I integrate my faith into what do I do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, my last question then, you don't know what's next for you or how much longer you're going to be doing this. And we talked about some of the challenges and the divisiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to ask, what's your hope for South Dakota as you think about the future? We're starting this new decade. I believe the world has forever changed because of this pandemic. We have to define a new normal versus the old normal.
Yeah.
What's your hope?
Well, I guess I would hope that South Dakota would be a place that is a place that's attractive to people for the right reasons. And I think, people right now want to come here. They view us as a wide open space where they can, and they have a lot of freedom that they can exercise on a personal level, and places they can go. And I wish winters would go away, but that's not a new wish. But I think just in terms of the state, that we would, as we grow in terms of population, that we would also sort of grow together and become more unified. I think there are things about this state that are really distinctive, and part of it, like I said earlier, comes back to this innate kind of common sense that we have, an innate desire to solve problems and solutions. And I think there's a constructive way to do that. And I hope that we continue to provide that example, and that we have leaders who lead that way, because I do think that it does affect the people around them. And that's whether it's state, local, there are a lot of people in leadership positions, whether it's in a political, civic, church, whatever.
Yeah.
Look for opportunities to lead and be difference makers. And I hope that South Dakota is a difference maker, just not only for our state, but as an example to the rest of the country.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Senator, for coming on. Thanks
You
for
bet.
the time.
Always good to be with you. Thanks, John.
Yeah, good to catch
Tell your
up.
family hi.
Take care.
All right.
And that was our conversation with Senator John Thune here on the Leadmore podcast. Remember, you can listen to Leadmore podcast episodes at www.leadmorepodcast.com. And we actually drop new episodes every single Thursday. So wherever you listen to podcasts, you can subscribe on Apple. You can follow us on Spotify. And just like this episode, we also put up the video on YouTube, if you want to check that out on youtube.com. And thanks again for listening. Take care and be well.